Well, good morning. Today we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and this is a passage that is so understood and has been in Christendom for so long that we're getting strange practices because of it. But I think if you look at it, we're going to understand it, and we're only going to look at the first part of the chapter because that's all really the time we have. But look at verse 1 of 14. It says, "Pursue love and desire spiritual gifts, but especially that you may prophesy." Why does it say especially that you may prophesy? Because prophecy, he's going to say, is going to edify the whole church. Why? Because we can understand what you're saying. Watch what he says in verse 2. "For he who speaks in a tongue does not speak to men but to God, for no one understands him. However, in the Spirit he speaks mysteries." Now, I want you to understand this verse in the context of the passage it's written. And when we look at it, I think you're going to understand this whole tongues thing better. He's going to use, in this whole context, sometimes he's going to use the word tongue, singular, and sometimes he's going to use the word tongues, plural. And he's talking about two different things. When he uses the word tongues, singular, tongue means languages. Or language. When he uses the word plural, it's talking about different languages. If I'm talking about Greek, Hebrew, Japanese, Chinese, these are different languages, plural. That makes sense to use it in a plural sense. But when he uses it singular, he's talking about one particular thing. Okay? He's talking in that sense about gibberish. Something that's an unintelligible language. Now, why wouldn't you use plural for that? Because how many unintelligible languages, gibberishes, are there? One. Okay? And this was the counterfeit. This is what was going on in Corinth. They were making it up, and it mimicked the true spiritual gift of tongues, which happened at Pentecost, where everybody heard in their own language. Okay? So watch, in verse 2 he says, "He who speaks in a tongue," that's singular, which is gibberish, "does not speak to men but to God." Now you say, "Oh, but you're talking to God. This is how we must pray, right?" Unfortunately, in many translations, God is capitalized. Greek does not have in the Greek, there's no definite article there. And a better translation is to a God. In other words, an unknown God. And this is what they were used to doing in their old religion. Was going, ah, la, 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 and then remember the big clang we heard yesterday? With the clanging cymbal and that kind of thing? He says you should go back to that if you're going to be doing that stuff. This is what he's talking about here. He's not talking to men in the church, but to a God. Okay? For no one understands him. He says, in the Spirit, he speaks mysteries. So people have taken that to say, "Oh, but I'm talking about mysteries that nobody understands." No one understands, including you. In the Spirit, he's not talking about in God's Spirit. He's talking about in the human spirit, or even worse, in the spirit of a demon. He speaks mysteries. Now, what is a mystery? If he was talking about a mystery of God, he'd be talking about something that was hidden in the Old Testament yet revealed in the New. This isn't a mystery like that at all. This is something that nobody gets. Okay? And so that's verse 2. Look at verse 3. "But he who prophesies speaks edification and exhortation and comfort to men." See, that's why prophecy is a good gift. It's something you're explaining Scripture. You're doing that. In verse 4 he says, "He who speaks in a tongue," that's singular again, "edifies himself." Why? Because it was a prideful thing. They were like doing this as a showy thing, this gibberish, "But he who prophesies edifies the church." I wish you... Now look at verse 5. This is going to be a little confusing if you don't follow it. "I wish you all spoke with tongues." See? He says, people say, "But Paul says speak in tongues." That was plural when he says this. Okay? He's talking about the true gift of tongues, the one that was exercised at Pentecost. Wish you all spoke with tongues, but even more that you prophesied. Okay? For he who prophesies is greater than he who speaks with tongues, which is plural, languages. Okay? Unless indeed he interprets, that the church may receive instruction. So he says, yeah, it'd be great if you spoke with real languages that made sense. But if you're going to do that, you better have an interpreter. Otherwise, nobody gets it. It's no good for the church. And spiritual gifts are to edify the church. Okay? Look at verse 7. Even things without life, whether flute or harp, when they make a sound, unless they make a distinction in sounds, how will it be known what is piped or played? He says, even an instrument, the lute or the flute or whatever you're going to play, the drums, if it's just all gibberish, what sense does it make? He says, even an inanimate object has to make sense. Now, we're at this music conference here in Austin, Texas, and I'll walk up to a keyboard or something because there's all kinds of stuff here they're trying to get you to buy. And I can play little keys and stuff, but it doesn't make any sense because I wouldn't know what a chord was if it hit me in the face. So it's all gibberish. He says, that is in music, okay? In the same way, you as a human need to make sense. He kind of wraps up in verse 9. So likewise, you, unless you utter by the tongue words easy to understand, how will it be known what is spoken? He says, look, God's not here to confuse you. Now, this counterfeit tongues, it is confusing. And especially to the world, where they're like, wow, this is crazy, And that's still the case in church where they're doing that. He continues to make the point in verse 10. He says, every language of the world is not without significance. He says, languages in the world, they are to communicate, not to confuse. Okay? And he says, that's the way that this gift ought to have been used, was to make things more clear, not unclear. Verse 14, he says, so if I pray in a tongue, he's talking sarcastically here, in gibberish, he says, my spirit prays. He says, okay, yeah, I'll take what you're saying. Maybe my spirit is praying, right? He says, but my understanding is unfruitful. He says, yeah, sure, you say you're praying in your spirit, but my understanding is unfruitful. In other words, I don't even know what I'm saying. What good is that? Okay? Verse 15, what's the conclusion then? This is the conclusion. I will pray with the spirit, and I will pray with the understanding. He's saying here, look, I am going to pray with my heart, but I'm also going to pray in a way that I understand. He's not talking about two different prayer times. He's talking about the same prayer time when you understand what you're praying. He says, yeah, pray with your whole heart, but also with your brain. You need to understand. And I want you to understand this. There isn't a single time in Scripture where we have a clear case of someone praying gibberish to God, where they didn't understand what they were saying, okay? Or where there was no interpretation, and that wasn't even a prayer to God. That was to the church, okay? But never a case where there's prayer in Scripture where they didn't understand what they're saying. He wraps up in verse 19. Yet in the church I would rather speak 5 words with my understanding, that I may reach others, than 10,000 words with a tongue, singular, gibberish. He says, if you spoke 5 words that people understood, that'd be better than just all the gibberish in the world. Well, that's all the time we have today. I get 9 minutes on YouTube, and so read the chapter. Have a great day. God bless you.